Uh, and I've been on a journey in Guatemala for 27 years, and I feel like Jesus and God were preparing me. So I didn't go to Guatemala for the first time until I was 48 years old, and I quit the Methodist ministry when I was 23. I did it for 4 years, and so between those two dates, I feel like God was preparing me to go down there, and it's what I marvel about God is He works in mysterious ways. He doesn't always work the way we expect Him to, and I feel like that's the way my life has been. I never thought of myself as a missionary. I never thought of going anywhere out of the country to do anything, except I served in the Air Force for a couple of years overseas, but didn't plan on going over there, but God had something else in mind. The theme of what I want to share with you this morning is it's the little things that make the difference. And it is the things that don't bring us praise or position or power that are the most lasting things in the world. I mean, can any of you imagine that Jesus would have chosen the cross? Can any of you imagine that any one of his disciples would have said, I think what you ought to do is go hang on that cross and die? No, it confounds us the way God directs us. So I don't think any of us should be confounded if God directs us in different ways, and sometimes very quietly and in very small but very, very powerful ways. So I have 3 stories I want to tell you, and I hope I don't get too wordy, but it's kind of hard for me. These are stories that have meant a tremendous amount of my life. And in fact, the middle story is so fresh because it's about my diagnosis with cancer 5 years ago. And then my brother's diagnosis with cancer 2 years ago. And this past Wednesday, my brother died of cancer, and we had exactly the same cancer. And so I stand before you a miracle, the fact that I'm here. You know, God was finished with my brother on Wednesday, but apparently He's not finished with me yet. So He had me slated to come speak to you for sure, I know that. So. And to share about my journey. I mean, each one of us has a journey, and I'm sure it is rich with stories. And I just want to tell 3 of those stories. The first one, and this is probably hard to see, but this is the cab of a galleon motor grader. You know, one of those kind of praying mantis little machines that with the blade on it that blades the gravel roads in the road district. That's the kind of machine, that is the cab of the machine. And then up in that cab is a guy with a hat on, and then I am crouched behind the guy with the hat on. So let me set it up. So it's 1964. I'm 14 years old. My dad has put me to work for his construction company, which ironically was the same name as mine, Strickland Construction. And he had the brilliant idea to have me run stakes for the motor grader. And I don't know that I've ever seen anybody else do that, but I think my dad wanted to teach me lessons about hard work. You know, so I was a stake runner, which means I run back and forth in front of the motor grader, and I would motion to the grader operator, go down or go up according to the blue top, and I would pull out a marker stake. He would blade over it. I'd go back behind him and set another marker stake back where he just bladed, run out in front of the grader again, and do the same thing over and over as we went up and down. And this is for a airplane runway in El Reno, Oklahoma in 1964. So on this particular day, J.B. Milner, who's the guy in the hat that's up there in this picture, he is bound and determined, no matter what the weather does, no matter what, he's going to finish grading to be prepared for asphalt the next day. So, and we're working daylight to dark, and sometime in the afternoon the clouds start gathering, and it looks like a storm is coming. But JB is one of those guys that's so determined he wants to finish the job that day. So even as the clouds are gathering, we keep grading and grading. And it gets darker, and the wind comes up. And then it starts to rain. And then it starts to hail, little bitty pieces of hail. And then they become nickel-sized pieces of hail. And then all of a sudden they are golf ball-sized pieces of hail. And so at that point, JB, when they become golf ball size, he stops the motor grader. and you can see a horizontal window there in the front of the motor grader, and that's one of those windows that it goes like this. I think of a jalousie window, and so it hinges in the middle. But the problem with that window is it had not been closed in 4 or 5 years. So it was rusted open. And so he's up there, I'm sitting at the back of the motor grader, crouched in the corner. He's up there trying to get that window to close so we can stop the hail, because the hail was coming directly at us. And the hail's coming into the cab of the motor grader. I'm in the back of it. He's at the front trying to close the window, and he finally gives up on closing the window, and he takes his body and covers my body. So he took the brunt of the hailstorm and saved me from the hail. Next picture. So that night, we obviously, when the rain finally stopped, we couldn't grade anymore, so we load up in his 1953 Ford pickup, drive back into town to our rooming house where we're staying. We're sharing a room in a rooming house, and decide to clean up to get ready for dinner that night. And as we are cleaning up, I look at JB, and JB has black and blue marks all over his back. And that's where he was shielding me from the hailstorm. And as I look back on that, that's one of those very key moments in my life when I felt the amazing grace of God. No greater love hath a man than any lay down his life for another man. J.B. Milner laid down his life, or was willing to lay down his life to protect me from the hailstorms in El Reno, Oklahoma in 1964. When I think about the seeds of my Christian faith, that's one of the important chapters in my book, and one of the important chapters in my life. No greater love hath a man than he lay down his life for another. That's what Jesus did for all of us. But in a very real sense, JB was Jesus for me in 1964. Now, the interesting thing about JV, and this is an important point, some of us like to talk, we like to preach, we like to tell stories, we like people to listen to us. JB was a quiet man. He never talked about his faith, but every Wednesday night and every Sunday night that I was with him for 2 years in the summers, he went to church and invited me to go with him. So he didn't have to tell me about Jesus. He was Jesus to me. Go on to the next. The second story I want to tell you about. This happened 5 years ago. My wife, who's a nurse, some of you know her, Peggy, she said, I think you need to go get a blood test. I know you don't want to go to the doctor, and I know you think you're healthy as a horse and nothing will ever make you sick. And yeah, I said, I know, you're right. I run 20 miles a week and I eat an orange every day, and that's going to make me live forever. I was absolutely sure of that. But she said, just in case something might be going on, I want you to get a blood test. So I got a blood test. I was showing no symptoms of anything. Running every morning like I've done for the last 53 years. But the blood tests came back. The doctor said, there's good news and bad news. And I go, well, what's the good? The good news is all your tests look good except one. And I said, well, what was that test? And they said, that was your PSA, and your PSA was 250. Well, 250 didn't mean a thing to me. So I said, well, what is it supposed to be? He says, low single digits. I said, and you're telling me my PSA is 250 and it's supposed to be 4 or 5? Yeah, Roger, that's what I'm telling you. And I said, well, what does that mean? And I said a he, it was actually a she. And she says to me, she says, well, Mr. Strickland, it means that you are stage 4 prostate cancer. And I said, so what does stage 4 mean? And she says, you're going to die of cancer. So I thought about that a minute, and I said, well, how long do I have? And she says, you have between 4.5 and 5.5 years to live. I was totally shocked. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm healthy. I run every day. I eat an orange every day. How can this be? And on top of that, she delivered it like she was telling you about a 5-year powertrain warranty on my car. I mean, she just sort of matter-of-factly said, and you have 4.5 to 5.5 years to live. I said, okay, I got to think about it. And I said, is there treatments? And she said, yes. That's 4.5 to 5.5 years if we take aggressive measures to stop the growth. And I said, okay. Friends, that was 5.5 years ago. I'm still here. So I wanted a second opinion. So I went to the Mayo Clinic. But by the time I got in the Mayo Clinic 5 weeks later for my appointment at the Mayo Clinic, and they ran the same set of tests, and they all came back the same, except my PSA was now 350, not 250. And I asked the doctor, who happened to be a man my age, which I felt more comfortable. I said, Doc, do you agree with the diagnosis? And he says, yes, sir. He said, then the big question I think we would all ask is, was she right when she said I only have 4.5 to 5.5 years to live? And he said, probably. But, he said, you might live 10, you might live 15. And I said, is there anything else I can do to get rid of this cancer? And he said, Roger, you can't get rid of the cancer. It is in you, it's going to kill you, it's just a matter of time. And he says, but I would recommend another thing besides what the doctor at KU recommended. So instead of just taking 4 big horse pills every day, I get an injection every 6 months. And somehow between those two things, I stand before you a reasonably healthy 75-year-old man that hopes and prays he has 5 to 10 more years to live. And I said earlier that my brother died. He died of prostate cancer after only 2 years. And I watched him die, and that's the only time I've ever watched anybody die. It was terrifying to me because I realized I'm going to go through this myself. And it was terrifying to watch his wife scream and yell, and thinking that I might make my wife scream and yell at some point in the future. But you know, as I prayed and thought about it, I thought, Lord, you so far have kept me alive. You're keeping me alive because you have other things for me to do. And with my brother Denny, he had run the good race. He had kept the faith. And he was finished. And that's what I have in mind for you, Roger. So be encouraged by your brother's life, not discouraged. And be encouraged to go on with your trail, your path. And you know, I'm beginning to rejoice in that. It's hard to do. I still miss my brother. Another thing I heard as we sat around for 2 days as a family talking was one of his friends called and he put himself on speakerphone, and he said to the family that was sitting there, he'd been in an AA group with my brother. My brother was an alcoholic, recovered alcoholic. And my brother, these are things I knew he was an alcoholic. I knew he was active in AA. but I didn't know the extent of the ministry of my brother. So this guy calls us up on the day of Denny's death, and he wants to make it clear to all of his family that he was alive today because my brother had been his sponsor. And that's what he believed. So that just reassured me that my brother had finished well. He had run his good race, and that I still had a few more laps in mine. And to be grateful for that. So the theme here, if you're getting it, the theme is J.B. Milner didn't talk about Jesus, at least not to me. But his actions were the actions of Jesus. He loved on me. My brother, who didn't talk about Jesus to me, except at the very end in the last couple of months, but his actions were the actions of a man who loved the Lord and who led other men. So the theme that I'm trying to say is, we're not all preachers, we're not all teachers, but we're all, every one of us, a servant, equipped and commanded to serve others. Some of us extremely quietly, and some of us loud like me. But the theme is, we're all called to do and be the love of Jesus Christ. I have one more story. Oh, by the way, this is just a picture of me continuing to run, because I feel like that's what God has called me to do. That's how I'm part of how I'm staying alive, and I'm still eating an orange every day. Next picture. Okay. The mission work in Guatemala. I've been about that for 27 years. I go down there 3 times a year. I take a group of anywhere from 8 to 20 people. They are just ordinary people like everyone sitting in this room, who just have a heart to go and serve other people who don't have as much as they have. So we go to San Lucas, Guatemala for normally a nine-day trip. And we go down there and we build a metal building, and if you can see surrounding those 2 people is a new Butler metal building. So over the last 27 years, I've been able to get 50 Butler buildings paid for and donated. And we go down there and we build churches, schools, and community centers in the San Lucas area, which is a town of 20,000 people with 20 different little villages. And so many of those villages I've been back 2 and 3 times, because they started with 1 building, they needed a second building because their school was bursting at the seams, or they needed a church. So like I said, over the last 27 years, we've gone down there and built 50 buildings for churches, schools, and community centers. So this particular job is one that really touches my heart, and it's the one we just finished in January of this year. Now, normally where we go is 5,000 feet of elevation. So it's like Denver, Colorado. So even though in Guatemala we were in the summer, even though it was winter here, it was summer in Guatemala. Because they have a wet season and a dry season, and the temperature's the same year round, but it's a little hotter when it's a dry season, and winter is the dry season. So that's really their summer. So we're down there, and at 5,000 feet of elevation, where I did most of my work in the last 27 years, it's high enough up that it doesn't get really hot. But this town, and the town is called Hermosa. Hermosa wanted a school building. And Hermosa was a very small, very poor town that was only probably 10, 15 years old. Well, I know they're 10 years old because they've been asking me for a building for 10 straight years. Then they needed the building for a classroom for their school, because right now the kids were walking out to the highway, walking up the highway to the next village, and going into that village where I had built a school for class. But they had to walk along the highway. There were no buses down there. They had to walk to school and walk home every day. And the leaders of that community wanted a school in their own neighborhood so the kids wouldn't have to walk to school. So for 10 years they'd been asking me for a building, and for 10 years I had said no. And the reason I said no was pretty selfish. The elevation where this building is built is 2,000 feet above sea level. Where I normally work is 5,000 feet above sea level. I didn't want to work in that heat. As long as somebody else needed a building that was at 5,000 feet, I wasn't going to 2,000 feet. But they kept asking and kept asking and kept asking, and I finally said yes. And I got down there and realized how poor they were, because every street in the town was dirt, and most of the houses had a dirt floor, and and their roof was rusted out tin. It's a very poor neighborhood. The work they had was intermittent piecework on farms in the local area for rich descendants of the Spanish who owned the plantations. They owned the plantations. They owned the fincas. And that's all the work they got. So they couldn't afford anything. They certainly couldn't afford to build a school. Anyway, I agreed to go down there. And on the last day that we're there, I'm a little bit difficult to work with sometimes, because I'm focused on finishing what I've started. So on this particular Friday afternoon at about 4 o'clock, I'm on a little step ladder running a screw into the top of that window, because I want to get this building finished, because I'm hot, I'm tired, and I want to get back up to the cooler mountains and sit down. Just a little aside to how hot it was and how old I am. You know, a normal 70, this is probably too much information, but you'll probably remember it. You know, old men go to the bathroom pretty often. The 5 days I worked down there at that elevation, it was so daggum hot, and I sweated so much, I never went to the bathroom all day long for 5 days. So it was difficult, and I really just wanted to be finished and get in the back of a pickup truck and ride back up the hill to where it was cooler. But I'm standing on this ladder, and this woman, well, I don't know who it was, somebody tugs on my pant leg. And I'm still running the screw because I want to finish getting that screw in. And my pant leg gets tugged a second time. And I just turn around like, who's bothering me now? And this lady, Mary Lou, was standing there with a bowl of bananas. And someone came up to help interpret so she could say something to me. And Mary Lou says to me, I wanted to say thank you to you for bringing this building to us so that my grandkids will have a place to go to school. And she says, the only way I know how to say thank you, and the only thing I can afford to give you, is a bowl of bananas that I picked myself. And she hands me the bowl of bananas. And what I realized is, those are bananas that she would normally feed her family with. But she wanted so much to say thank you to me that she gave me that bowl of bananas. And to me, that is like the widow's mite. You know, the story of the widow's mite. Where Jesus says, and I'll paraphrase it. So Jesus says, this is in Luke 21 something. But Jesus said, you know, all you rich people with your robes and your fancy talk and your pronouncements and your sermons and whatever, that doesn't even begin to say what the widow who gave 2 pennies has said. And Jesus went on to say, and you know, most of you people, well, I'm generalizing here. Jesus said, most people give out of their extra. I don't want to judge you at all, I'm sorry. Most people give out of their extra. They don't give out of their essence of who they are. That widow gave out of the essence of who she was. Mary Lou gave out of the essence of who she was. Mary Lou preached a tremendous sermon to me that day without saying a word. She was Jesus, just like J.B. Milner was Jesus, just like my brother helping his brother in AA was Jesus. I believe in my heart we are called more than anything else to love each other. And that's what the amazing grace of God is all about. Giving ourselves as Jesus gave himself for others.